Hello, my name is Dakota Smith, and today we're going to be talking about game detection in Blueprint. There has been some discussion in the forums about gamepad detection when it comes to Blueprint, and people believe it to not be very viable. They think that it's a C++ class exposed only. That's not true at all. We're going to be going over a gamepad detection system in Blueprint. So what I want you to do is I want you to open Unreal Engine. You're going to get to this window. I want you to click Games, click Next, and click Third Person, and click Next. Now we're not going to be using any content from the starter content, so we're going to rename the project to Gamepad Detection. Alright, now while we're in gamepad detection, we actually need to go over a few things. First, input. When a gamepad is connected, what we're going to try and do is we're going to set a variable that says is connected. Now, the interesting thing about this is under input, if you have a player controller and a character, whatever is in the player controller on input gets executed first. That's the first thing that you need to know. Now, the default player that comes with this template does not have a controller. Its controller is basically a C++ class in the engine content. So it's defaulted. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make your own player controller. So give me 1 second to erase all this. Alright, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go to the content and we're going to make a new folder and we're going to call it Blueprints. Oh, not actor, new folder. We're going to open it and we're going to make a new player controller. So we're going to go to Blueprint class and then you're going to select this window right here, Blueprint player controller. So we're going to rename it PC player controller. Now, to actually have this controller be the controller of our character, we're actually going to need to make a new game mode as well. So we're going to go to game mode base and we're going to name it GM gamepad detection, and we're going to name it that. Now what we're going to want to do is we're going to go open GM gamepad detection. Now we're going to go to default pawn class. We're going to make that our third person character, and our player controller class we're actually going to name PC player controller. Compile and save, and we're going to exit. Now a good demonstration is we're going to actually open that as well. So open the third person character and then open your player controller. You'll see a lot of input logic inside the third person character. Now, usually you do put certain input logic in the player character itself, especially on things that are dependent on that character specifically. But a lot of the time, a lot of different controls are actually controlled to the player character. Now, the thing to know about the player character is player controller, not player character, player controller, is that it executes input first. So what I want to do is I want to go to the event graph, and I'm also going to go to the event graph on the third person character. Now I want you to look at this script right here. It says jump, input action jump. This is actually being called from our input on our project settings. So the space bar on mouse and keyboard and the bottom face button on controller. But I'm going to show you one thing that's very important. If we go to input action jump and we just drag off of here and go print string, this will be executed before the jump command because player controller is actually higher in the hierarchy. So anything in the player controller, if it's mapped to the same key, will activate. So we're going to go ahead and bind our project settings, our game mode, to the project settings. So we're going to go to this little blueprint because I don't want to add it to the project settings necessarily. I'm just going to override the level blueprint, and we're going to go select game mode base, and then we're going to do GM gamepad detection. And we're going to save that. Now I'm going to hit play, and when I press spacebar, all it does is print, because game character and the player controller are both firing this event, it's going to go through player controller first. So let's open player controller and see what it's doing. It's just printing this string. Now, an interesting part of this is if you click on input action jump, you'll see the details panel. It actually has details. Now, consume input. This is what I want you to pay attention to. What I want you to do is uncheck that and click compile and save. And now if we hit play, it's doing both. So consume input basically means exactly what it sounds like. It's going to consume the input and not let it go any lower on the hierarchy, aka our character. So we uncheck that. And now, I already explained that. I want to go ahead and delete that out of this folder. Now, what I want to do is I want to right click. And we're going to type any key. All right. This isn't bound to the player project settings or the designer's project settings or input or anything like that. This fires literally on any input whatsoever. So, I'm going to compile and save that. We need to actually look at the way that we want this system to function. So, I'm going to go ahead and get my pen out. What I want to do is make a system that has a gamepad, and on any button, let's just make a default keyboard here. When either of these are pressed, it's going to fire this any key. When it fires that any key, it's going to execute this logic. So let's go ahead and erase this. So off of press key, any key, we want to go to the right and consume input, because if we consume this input, then no input will fire to the player character. We don't want that. So we're going to uncheck consume input. We're going to compile and save. Now to the bottom pin of this any key event, we're going to drag off and we're going to ask it a question. Is gamepad key? Now, this checks the key that was coming in, asks if it was a gamepad, and returns if it's true or false. Now, out of this, we're going to go to branch. And we're going to go and add a new variable. And this new variable will be is using gamepad. We're going to compile and set it to true. Or, we'll set it to false. We'll just leave it at false because it'd be easier for demonstration. So off of true, we want to set this. And we want to set it to true if it is a gamepad. And we're going to copy and paste. And we're going to set it to false if it's not. Now, off of event tick, we're going to go print string. And we're actually going to get, this is using gamepad, go into the string. And for duration, just so it doesn't fill the screen, we're going to go delta seconds. Compile and save. Now, I want to show you one thing. You actually have to have a gamepad to do this. I think that may be self-explanatory. Let me get my gamepad out real quick. All right. Now, if I hit play, it's saying false, which means it's asking whatever key I'm pressing and setting the variable for is using gamepad false. Now I'm just using mouse and keyboard right now. Now I'm going to switch to gamepad. Now it says true. So we could perform any function we want to depending on whether you're using a gamepad or mouse and keyboard, no matter what. I mean, this is a very flexible system, and it's about to get even more flexible. Here's the problem. Now, I'm going to go to back to the content folder. We're going to go to third person BP. We're going to go to maps. And what I want to do is duplicate this map. Now, I'll rename the map test1, all lowercase. I'll save. Now, what I'm actually setting up here is to show you one very important thing that I'm sure that you will not want this to do. So, what I want to do right now is add a gamepad face button, and then just do right, since it's not actually being called from anything. Face button right, and off of here we're going to open level. And we renamed that map test level, all lowercase, so test_1 would be the name of that level. And we're going to compile and save. So whenever I press the gamepad face button right, which will be the B button on my Xbox controller, we're going to fire off this function which opens a level. So if I click play, I'm starting out with mouse and keyboard. It starts out as false. But if I switch over to gamepad, it says true. However, when I open a new level with the B button, it says false. If you change levels while this variable is only set in the player controller, it resets it. So what I want to do is find a way that launches some variables and keeps track of data that doesn't depend on level. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click, we're going to blueprint class, we're going to click all classes, and this is where the magic happens. Game instance. We're going to select it, and we're going to name it GI game instance. Now we're going to open this up, and we only want to add one variable, and that is using gamepad. And we're going to compile and save, and go back to the third person player controller that we had. And instead of setting a variable in the player controller, which I only wanted to show you to let you know that wouldn't work if you changed levels, we're going to delete this logic right here. We're actually going to go to the event begin play, and we're going to get game instance. We're going to cast it to GI game instance, and we're going to get is using gamepad. Not get display name. It is using gamepad. And we're going to drag off of our own local variable and go to set. So whenever the game starts, it's going to ask our game instance, are you using a gamepad? Now, if that's true, then it's going to set is using gamepad in the player controller to true. Now, we're going to go to game instance. And this, we're going to say, is defaulted to false. But we can't actually use the game instance yet. We actually have to open project settings. We have to go to, let's just type in the search bar, instance. And our game instance class, we want to change that to GI game instance. So now we're using that game instance. So go back to the player controller. Whenever we press any key, we want to actually set is using gamepad, but we don't want to set it here. We actually want to set it in our GI game instance. So let's just copy and paste this section. Off of true, we want to set is using gamepad. And we want to set it to true. We're going to copy this and plug it into false, and then we're going to say false. So this will now dynamically tell the game instance what we actually are wanting to do, as far as like asking if we have a decent way of tracking the player controller and the gamepad input. So we're also going to copy and paste this to event tick. And we're going to delete that node, and we're going to get it. And we're going to print string. With that as the is using gamepad as the string in, and a duration for delta second, so it doesn't extend past its duration. I'm going to compile and save. Now, when I hit play, we start out with mouse and keyboard, which is always going to display false. Now, when I press the A key, it's going to say true, and I can walk around with the gamepad. Now, if I press B on the gamepad, it's going to load the level, but keep the variable. So you don't actually have to apply any changes on player start beyond what is in the begin play node on the player controller. So that's how you determine gamepad detection. I hope you like this video. If you learned something, just like, subscribe, leave a comment if you have any questions, and I'll try and get back to you. See you in the next one.